You've probably bumped into this yourself, right? You ask an AI a tricky question, and you either get a super robotic, "I can't answer that," or, even worse, you get a genuinely terrible answer. Nailing that balance between being helpful and being harmless is one of the biggest challenges in AI today. But a team at Anthropic came up with a pretty fascinating solution that might just change the whole game.
And yeah, this is the core question. How do you build an AI that avoids causing harm without making it so ridiculously cautious that it refuses to answer anything even remotely controversial? It's this crazy tightrope walk between creating a dangerous tool and one that's just frustratingly useless.
And this slide, wow, it just nails the problem perfectly. Let's call it the AI safety paradox. On the left, you've got an AI that's way too helpful, dishing out dangerous advice. And on the right, you have an AI so focused on being harmless that it just clams up. Both of these are failures, right? One is actively harmful, the other is passively helpless.
So this paradox is really the central challenge. The old-school methods of teaching AI right from wrong, having thousands of people flagging bad content, that's what created this exact tension. Let's dig into why that is.
So the core issue researchers found is that when you train a model to avoid harmful stuff at all costs, the AI figures out that the safest path is often just to refuse to answer. It learns that being evasive is the best way to avoid making a mistake, which makes it harmless, sure, but also not very useful. This is exactly the problem Anthropic set out to solve.
Okay, so how do you escape this paradox? This is where the idea gets really, really cool. Instead of relying on this giant army of humans to teach the AI what's right and wrong, what if the AI could teach itself? And that brings us to the big idea, constitutional AI. Basically, it's a method where an AI learns to be harmless, not from endless human examples, but by following a short, human-written list of principles, a constitution. It essentially supervises itself using these core rules. Pretty wild, right? This quote from the research paper really hits the nail on the head. We're moving away from constant human feedback on every single bad answer to focused human oversight through a set of guiding principles. Honestly, it's a total game changer for how we think about AI alignment. Okay, so this sounds great in theory, but how does it actually work in practice? Well, the whole process is broken down into two main stages. It goes from an AI correcting its own mistakes to an AI that's actively improving its own judgment. Let's break it down. So, the whole thing happens in two key stages. You can think of it like learning any new skill. First, in the supervised stage, the AI learns the rules by critiquing its own work, kind of like an editor fixing a first draft. Then, in the reinforcement learning stage, it starts to develop its own judgment, comparing two options and deciding for itself which one is better. So let's zoom in on stage one, self-correction. It all starts with a harmful prompt. The AI gives its first, often flawed, response. But then, and this is the magic part, it's prompted to critique its own response based on the Constitution. And finally, it rewrites the answer to be better. It's this powerful internal feedback loop. And this slide just makes it crystal clear. Look at this example. The initial response is dangerously helpful. Then the AI critiques itself, calling out that hacking is illegal. But that final revision, that's the masterpiece. It's both harmless and helpful because it explains why it's a bad idea instead of just giving a canned no. Now the second stage is where this whole thing goes into overdrive. Here, the AI generates two different answers to a prompt. Then, another AI model, which is also guided by the Constitution, chooses which of the two answers is better. Less harmful, more ethical. This process creates a gigantic dataset of AI preferences, which is then used to train the final model. It's reinforcement learning, but from AI feedback. They call it RLAIF. So, the big question. Does it actually work? Does this whole method of self-correction and self-judgment actually solve that paradox we started with? Well, the results are pretty darn compelling. Let's take a look at a really challenging, really toxic prompt. This is something designed to get a harmful stereotype as a response. It's exactly the kind of thing where older models would either say something offensive or just completely shut down. And here is the payoff. The standard AI on the left gives that classic, useless, I won't respond, but the constitutional AI on the right does something so much smarter. It doesn't just refuse the question, it actively pushes back and corrects the harmful stereotype, explaining why it's wrong. This is the breakthrough. It's harmless, but it is not helpless. This chart just seals the deal. It shows the harmlessness score for 3 different models. A helpful model scores low on harmlessness.
The classic harmless model scores high, but we know it does that by being evasive. But just look at the constitutional AI model. It gets the highest score for harmlessness, and it does so without sacrificing helpfulness. It actually breaks the trade-off.
So why does all this matter? Well, because this isn't just some clever technical trick. This represents a major leap forward in how we build AI systems that are safe and trustworthy, and it has huge implications for the future.
So let's just summarize the key takeaways. First, this approach is way more scalable. You don't need a massive team of humans labeling every single toxic output. Second, it's more transparent. The AI's ethical rules aren't buried in a billion data points. They're written down in a clear, human-readable constitution. And finally, it's just more effective at creating the kind of AI we actually want. One that can be helpful without being harmful, and harmless without being helpless.
And this leaves us with one final and, frankly, massive question. This technology allows us to encode principles directly into an AI, but if an AI's ethics are decided by a constitution, that puts an incredible amount of power into that single document. So, who gets to write it? Who decides what principles are going to govern our most powerful tools? That's a question not just for a few researchers, but for all of us.